Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Markolf. I'm an assistant research professor in the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Sustainable Engineering at Arizona State University, where my research primarily focuses on urban infrastructure resilience to extreme events like flood and wildfire. I am joined today by Dr. Nancy Grimm and Dr. Mikhail Chester to discuss what exactly is resilience. And before diving into that, I would like to give our guests a chance to introduce themselves. So first, we'll start with Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Grimm. I'm a Regents Professor in the School of Life Sciences at Arizona State University. I'm an ecosystem scientist, but I work in interdisciplinary teams studying cities and their resilience and envisioning their futures. I was founding principal investigator of the Central Arizona Phoenix Long-Term Ecological Research Project, and now I'm co-directing the Urban Resilience to Extremes Sustainability Research Network, which we call UREX for short, and then a new international network of networks called Natura, which is focused on synthesizing knowledge about nature-based solutions to urban resilience challenges of the Anthropocene.
Great, thank you, Nancy. And Mike?
So greetings, my name is Mikhail Chester. I'm a professor of civil, environmental, and sustainable engineering in the School of Sustainable Engineering and the Built Environment at Arizona State University. And I'm a civil engineer by training, but I run a research laboratory that focuses broadly on questions and solutions to preparing infrastructure for the challenges of the coming century. We do a lot of work around climate adaptation and the reliability of infrastructure under extreme events. I'm also the director of Arizona State's Meta Center for Infrastructure and Sustainable Engineering, and I'm an executive team member of the Urban Resilience to Extreme Sustainability Research Network.
Great. It's wonderful to have you both here today. And that brings us to the main topic of discussion, resilience, and what exactly resilience is. So resilience is becoming an increasingly prominent and popular topic across several disciplines. However, there is often a lot of difficulty actually defining it. In fact, it is sometimes easier to identify what is not resilient rather than what is resilient. So Nancy, I was wondering if you could maybe start our conversation off and describe a little bit about how ecologists historically have thought about and defined resilience.
Yeah, I actually feel like I've been working on resilience for my entire career, which is a pretty long one. So some of the earliest conceptual framings of resilience that I recall from my work as a graduate student studying stream responses to flood disturbance were that resilience was the rate of recovery after a disturbance to the pre-disturbance state. And that was viewed as one component of ecosystem stability, another being resistance, the ability of a system to withstand disturbances. So in the case of a flood in a stream, the riparian trees along the side of the stream might represent resistant ecosystem elements because they're large and they're rooted, whereas algae, another type of primary producer in the system, would represent a resilient element because even though they get scoured and washed away by the flood, they have low resistance. They regrow rapidly, so they have high resilience. Now, that framing, which I actually used in my dissertation, began to shift when ecologists recognized that ecosystems are almost never at equilibrium, but rather they're constantly changing. So a newer concept of resilience was introduced actually way back in 1973 by Buzz Halling, and he actually incorporates both older terms of resistance and resilience and refers to instead the capacity of a system to maintain its structure, its processes, its basic identity, and the feedbacks that contribute to its organization across various kinds of stresses, shocks, or what we call in ecology presses, continual drivers of change, and pulses, which are abrupt disturbances that are continually experienced by these ecosystems. So as the concept has evolved in ecology, especially when we bring in perspectives from social science, ideas of adaptation, relatively small tweaks in the system, and even transformation, where the entire landscape of stability states that can be occupied by the ecosystem shift, these have begun to be incorporated into the framework. And finally, we also recognize the need in social-ecological systems to ask resilience of what to what, when, and for whom. And this specifically addresses the challenges of incorporating human and built elements into the system.
Great. And Mike, how does this compare to your experiences with resilience in the engineering domain?
I would describe resilience engineering as a fairly new and evolving topic in some ways. Resilience in engineering seems to be less well developed than in the SES and STS communities, the social ecological and social technological systems communities. We've seen resilience as a concept in engineering take off in the past roughly 5 to 10 years, which largely coincides with efforts to protect infrastructure from climate extremes and a number of notable national, US, and even global efforts to focus on adaptation. So we see resilience engineering heavily being discussed in the climate adaptation communities, but seems to be somewhat less well developed when it comes to other dynamics or hazards. I think it's somewhat useful to take a step back and look at how resilience in engineering has evolved, the history of it. The concept isn't all that new. It first emerges in engineering with the design of warships in the early 19th century. By the 1960s, though, we're starting to see engineering using the term to mean specifically the capacity of a material to absorb and unload energy. And that definition has persisted for a long period of time. Until recently, resilience in engineering was dominated by this bounce back framing. So you've got a system that's going along at about 100% capacity, and then it's perturbed. It drops below 100% capacity and then slowly comes back because of sort of intervention and things that we do to bring the system back online, where the shape of that curve is actually really important. The problem that we're seeing is that, and now several scholars are actually addressing, is that resilience cannot be simply synonymous with bouncing back after taking a hit from a hazard. And that's partly because we can't always hold back the hazard, especially if it's uncertain and likely growing in severity, such as in the case of climate change extremes, and because we don't always know what the hazard is or how our engineered systems are going to perform. As such, we're starting to see resilience engineering framings that are starting to align with definitions in the more advanced SES and STS communities, their resilience framings, which tend to focus on principles of adaptation and transformation of the systems.
So given this kind of parallel thinking and increasingly convergent thinking about resilience in ecology and engineering, Mike, I was wondering your thoughts on kind of moving forward. How do you see the field of ecology informing and complementing resilient infrastructure design?
It's become clear that resilience encapsulates or should encapsulate social, ecological, and technological / infrastructural dimension. That there's interplay between those domains that, if recognized and leveraged, can lead to very different recommendations than if we simply focus on any one domain. Infrastructure resilience has for a long time emphasized armoring, strengthening, or hardening of the asset to hold the environment back. And as we think about new ways to deliver services by infrastructure in the face of changing conditions, it seems to make sense to look at principles of success in natural systems. As engineers, we're trained to never let failure happen, but natural systems don't follow this concept. What is around is what is adapted and transformed to be successful. With other systems having died off, engineers don't typically take this view. So we, in our biomimicry project, decided to do a deep dive into the concepts around biomimicry and ask whether there are design principles that could be extended to infrastructure. Biomimicry, for me, is one of a number of candidate new ways of thinking about how to change how we approach infrastructure adaptation.
Yeah, I agree with that. Biomimicry is new to me, but I think there's some promise in it. What I understood until now to be the purview of biomimicry was copying the adaptive design of organisms that have evolved through natural selection to be perfectly adapted to their environments. And that adaptive design is so much the case that in ecology, we ask for frequently disturbed systems like streams, whether disturbance is even disturbance in the context of organisms that have evolved to live there. Elements of our built environment certainly could benefit from copying species adaptations in nature. I think that's definitely true. But perhaps there also are some things we can copy at the ecosystem level, that is all the complex of organisms and the abiotic environment together in a system, as we seek to make our infrastructure more resilient. So taking lessons from the inherent resilience of natural ecosystems in the face of this ever-changing and disturbance-driven environment that they experience.
Great. So all of us are very much familiar with the growing complexity and shape of the hazards and threats facing our cities and our infrastructure system, which in turn has highlighted the need to think across disciplines. So it's really encouraging to see a approach like biomimicry serving that process and sort of forming a way to kind of bridge ecology and engineering, and is in a really exciting example for some of the possibilities that multidisciplinary research can bring. So Nancy and Mike, thank you very much for your time and for your insightful comments about where resilience thinking came from and, more importantly, where it's going.